Hey friends, so in this lesson we'll look at data caching. Caching is a technique used to store and reuse frequently accessed data to improve performance and efficiency of either an app, a website, or any other type of system. So instead of repeatedly fetching data from a database or a remote server, you store a copy of this data in a temporary storage, also called a cache, in your backend application. So let's proceed to implement data caching in our dartfrog application. Okay, so there are two ways of performing caching in dartfrog. There are even more, but there's one. The dartfrog has an inbuilt way of performing caching, or they have explained a very simple way of implementing caching, which we're going to see right away. And the second one that we're going to do in this tutorial is Redis. So let's first implement the simple way. So we'll just head over to our terminal and create a route is that focuses mainly on caching. So I'll just navigate to my project. Sorry. And then inside here, we're going to create a new route and call it Redis, cache Redis. So it will be in a folder called cache and in a folder called Redis. So we have our index.dart. So let's create a middleware for it. So it will be dartfrog, new middleware, cache Redis. There we have it. So how dartfrog explains caching is that you can use the middleware and inject, set up a temporary storage in form of a variable and access which will be private. So that means it can only be accessed in the context of the provider that we're going to create inside this middleware. It's a very simple way, not an enterprise level way. It's just when you want to have those simple checks that you want to do within your application. But for a complex and a more enterprise level implementation, you'll need a platform like Redis. So let me show you that example. So we may have a variable called string and set it as nullable and give it the word greeting. So you find that where it is, we have set it outside the handler. This set defines that this variable is a private variable and can only be accessed within inside here. So inside here, what we'll do is we're going to use the use method, and inside here we're going to define the provider middleware so that we inject the variable that we have, or this variable greeting. So what we're going to say is provider, and then we specify type string, define our context, and then we're going to pass in this variable. But now, because we've said it's possible that it's nullable, because it's a temporary cache, there's a time when we can clear the cache and there are times when the cache is full. So if it's actually empty, what we're saying, if it's empty, just pass in a text like hello. Great. So we're using this as a type of temporary storage, or also called a cache. So if you want to access this, we just head over to our index.dart. Inside our root handler, we just proceed to define a variable called value, and just call our greeting, the value in our greetings or in our temporary cache by passing in this. And then we come here and pass here value. So we have that. Let's run the dev server and see how that works. Let's proceed to our terminal inside here, let's run curl request get cache redis. If we enter, we get the text hello. So back to our code, what it has done, it has seen that this temporary cache is currently empty. So if it's empty, let's pass in a hello. But let's take a scenario where we are doing some implementation inside this middleware, and we got to a point where we had to define the greetings variable to something like hi. Let's say we have that. So if we try and run this again in our terminal, as you can see now, it picks whatever is in our on quotes temporary cache. So that's just a simple way of implementing the caching concept. But now let's proceed to, we're now going to look at a very important platform called Redis. So it provides very good documentation, but what I want us to do is install it. You can either install Redis itself in your local machine or just do this other way, which I would recommend, where you use Docker, install Redis in Docker and use it from there. So I'll share this link in the description box below so that you can install it, and you can pause this video for a minute for you to install, then we proceed. Now that you have installed it, we can proceed to work on our Redis implementation. So we already have our root handler and we have our middleware. So let's start from our middleware. We'll just delete this. And then inside here now, let's perform some implementation. So another thing, what we need to install is a certain package called Redis, that package. So let's install that. So it will be dart pub add Redis. So once it's installed, let's come here now and perform our implementation. So first thing, we're going to define a variable called con, and we're going to define it with a server connection of Redis, which is called Redis connection. So this is a class for server connection. Now that we have defined it outside, as it's equivalent to what we did when we were defining the greetings variable outside. So it's private only within this middleware. Next thing we're going to do is inside our middleware, we're going to pass a return, set it to async, and then inside here we're going to perform our implementation. So let's define a variable of type response and just set it here. We're going to initialize it as we proceed. Then we're going to do connect to our Redis, the Redis that we have installed in our Docker. So what you do, you just say await con.connect, and inside there you need to pass the host and the port. So I'll pass the host as localhost if it's within your machine, and then the port will be 8091. Confirm if that's the same on your end. And then once we have done that, we are going to initialize it to a variable called command. So the connect method connects on to the Redis server, and then you're passing the host and the port, so that and then you have to make sure your Redis is running. Let me show you how. So in my Docker, as you can see, I have a Docker here already that has Redis. So all I have to do is click on this so that it can start running, so that you can use it. That's all you have to do. Now back to our code. We'll proceed to add a semicolon there. Now that we have this, we'll proceed to, let's just add a try and a catch for error handling purposes. Let's just put this inside in case there's an error may occur. And then inside here, we're going to define the response. is equals to response dot JSON, and then just specify the body by saying success is false and the message is E2 string. Let's simply do that, and then inside here we're going to do a parser return of response. So let's proceed. It will disappear because it's only being defined outside here. Let's proceed and we'll get to see. So now that we have this variable command of type command, which is a data type in Redis, we're now going to proceed to sending a request or sending a command. And the first command we'll send, it's called auth, AUTH, because we want to authenticate the person who wants to actually run these commands first before they run. So Redis has many types of commands. Let me show you some of them. So Redis holds so many commands that you can actually use within it. So what we're going to perform is, for example, set. Let me show you this one that sets the string value of a key and it ignores its type. And then we also have a get. For a get, it returns the string value of a specific key that will specify. But all in all, these are the many commands that you can interact with, and the one that I'm talking about is auth, where we authenticate the connection. So if you want to learn more, I'll share this link in the description where you can review most of these commands, which are amazing if you're really investing in learning Redis in full-fledged. So let's go back to our code now that we know about that. So let's authenticate our connection using this variable of type command. So we'll just run await command dot send object. So we're sending data to the server using this method send object, and we'll pass 3 parameters. We'll pass the command itself, so it should be auth, and then we pass in the key and the value. So our key is our username. So you need to, in the process of installing Redis, there's a username and password you had to set. So that's what you're going to use. And if you did not set any, it's possible that you're using the default settings. So you can use the default user. So you can use the key default, but you need to have passed a password of some sort. So let me paste my password here. So here it is, and then I press enter semicolon. Okay, the way we're structuring it is wrong. It's supposed to be inside an array. So there we have it. So we have created a connection to the server, and now using the command, we are sending a request of some sort where we want to authenticate this user this current user. And now after authenticating, that's when now we can proceed to pass the context or the HTTP request, the request context to the root handler. Remember, the root handler is in the index.dart. So let's proceed to do that. So we'll say response is equals to await handler dot use. So we want it to use the instance of the type command for this variable, this specific variable. That means for it to have arrived here, it should have authenticated by then. So even before we do this, let's pass another try and catch here. Try, catch. so that if there is any issue in authenticating, it should fall inside here. So we'll just say response. It will be the same as this. Mhm. So we have another try and catch here to handle in case the authentication fails, we're able to receive a response. But until then, after authentication, we just say await.use handler.use. We pass the provider middleware and we specify the type of command. Pass our context and pass our variable command. We have an error. Let's see. To use provider. Let me try this command. Call context. There we have it. Now, as you can see, even our response can be identified now. So what we have simply done is we have come here, defined a variable of type response, and then we have proceeded to create a connection to the Redis server that should be running in our local machine, specified a host and a port. Then we've proceeded to call our first command in Redis, which is auth, that authenticates the connection by passing our username and password. And now that you have done that, now we pass our instance or this command or the connection or the command, our command instance, command capital C, to our root handler. That's what we've done, so that now we can go and use it, because so that we can handle the request that a user might bring in. So we come and use it now in our index.dart, and then once it's done, it will return the response that we pass it. I hope it makes sense. So let's close this and work on our index.dart. So in our index.dart, we'll handle two types of requests, a get and a post. So let's clear all this. And then we're going to perform the usual return switch. We're passing in the context dot request dot method, and then inside here we'll handle our first switch, our first case, as http method dot get, and then we're going to pass in a function here, call it get login status. So we want to use our Redis cache to handle or to store our login status. It's a very simple way. Yes, we have looked at how to perform authentication, but I thought use case like handling the login status would be a nice way to actually explain Redis and how it works. So there's a screen that I showed in app overview that just has a button. When you click that, it should just check, is our login status 1 or 0? That's what we're using. We're using 1 to mean that the user is logged in, and 0 to mean that the user is logged out. So if we receive in our cache, in our temporary cache in Redis, that our status is 0, that means this user should be logged out. But if it's set to 1, that means the user should be logged in. That's the idea. A very simple concept just for us to understand how Redis works. So we're handling that. So we just pass in the Our parameter will be request context, and pass in async. Then we pass this here and pass in the parameter context. Then next we're going to work on the HTTP method dot post. So we'll set another method function called set. Copy this, pass it here, passing the parameter context. Let's change our future to response to future. Add in async, and then add in our default case by passing in future.value, specify our response, and set the status code to method not allowed, which we'll get in .io. It's closing. Great. Now let's work on our two functions, starting with our first one. So our first one, we're going to go and get the instance of command from what we injected from our middleware. So to do that, we just say final value is equals to await context dot read command dot. So now we have gotten our instance, right? So now we want to send a command request to Redis, and the command request is, since we are performing a get login status, we want to go and get a value of the key type logged in. I hope it makes sense. So we'll just use the send object method, and inside here we just perform it the way we did in the middleware, as so we have a command, then we have the key, then we have the value. So let's proceed to do that. So over here we'll have but in our case here we'll have a get, and our get will just expect a key, so we'll just pass in a key logged in. Great. Then let's register our callback. Inside here we're going to pass in return. Actually, there's nothing much we're doing here, so we should have just returned it as was, and just pass in value, just so we'll get this. So this will be passed here, so our variable value will hold whatever will be returned here. So we want to do a small check if value is equal to null, because it's possible in the case where maybe we cleared the cache or cleared that specific key. If it's empty, let's define a variable called status and give it a 0, and then we're going to call another command and say await context dot read. We're calling the instance of command that we injected dot send object. So let's define our object, which will be set, and then our key will be logged in. Let's just copy as is to avoid any, and then we pass in status. So what we've done here, we have gone to get the key of type key called logged in, and if we get it as if that it's null, we just define a variable called status and set it to 0, or you can just set this to 0 directly, and then we want to send a request for set. That request, we pass it to the set command and then pass the key and the value so that it goes and sets that specific key to 0. So if we run this request again, it should be able to return now as 0. So after doing that, what we just do is do a return response body. Actually, we can just do status code http status dot no content. Great. Else, let's return an error, or just return, oh, if it's the value is not equal to, is not null, let's return the value dot to string. There are many ways of doing this, so you can play around with how you want to return it. So the value, let's see, oh sorry, .json body, yep, and that's how we get a value from Redis. Now let's work on setting. For setting, that means we expect the user to pass in a value in the body. So let's go and pick the body. Await context dot request dot json and cast it as map string dynamic. Then we go and pick the value that the user has passed in the body. We'll give it, set it as logged in as int. Then inside here, let's proceed to pass in a try for error handling. So we just want to handle whether it's successful or not. So let's just call a variable called success and set it first as false. So that we come here, if there's an error, so say the success was false, and then we'll return a response.json body success. Great. So let's work on our try. So in our try, what we do is just say await context. Let's get our command instance. Command, then send our object. You call the send object method and pass our object. So our object will be the command set, and we want to handle set our key logged in to the value that the user has passed, which is status. Enter, and we are done. So after that, so we'll just set the success to true, and we're finished with that. So if it's set to 0, logged out. If it's set to 1, logged in. So let's see this in action and how it would look. So back to our terminal. So let's do a cal. Let's just do a get and see. So for our get, the value is 0. So it's possible that I had pushed this request. So currently it's saying 0. That means logged out. Let's do a set. Cal request. So we pass in a post. Let's change the root to cache Redis. And then let's pass our value logged in and pass in 1, sorry, because we're setting, right? And the setting could be either 0 or 1. In this scenario, we can use it in a situation where we want to log out a user. So we set in logged in as 0, but the moment they log in, we set the logged in key to 1. But let's just pass in 1 because currently we have seen our key has the value 0, and see how that works. Success true. So let's just pass in a get, and it's 1. Awesome. So let's just set to 0 and see in a scenario where we are logging out. And then if we do a get, great. So our implementation is working perfectly, and I hope you have understood how Redis works. With just having installed it properly, you can now just have a section where you just handle all things to do with Redis. And I have shown you that in the middleware, this is a good place to actually perform authentication. You just do authentication. So that means no request will pass here without having to pass through authentication first. And then inside your index.dart, you perform as many commands as you want. We've just done set and get, but as you have seen, there's so many commands that you can actually implement on Redis and have fun with it. So let's proceed to the next lesson.